Beings from the darkness feed on our anxiety and fear. Rudolf Steiner on how to stop helping forces beyond. The renowned anthroposophist Rudolf Steiner, in his works, describes hostile spiritual beings that feed on our fear and anxiety. Anxiety, depression, and fear devastate so many people today, yet few consider that, in addition to the material negative influences in our lives, we may also be under the influence of beings that dwell in dimensions beyond our ordinary perception. In reality, there is much more than what we can see. Steiner advises us to pay closer attention to sensation, hearing, taste, and touch. In fact, analyses of the universe reveal that about 73% of it consists of dark energy, while another 23% is dark matter. At this stage, neither ordinary people nor scientists are able to interpret the meaning of dark energy and dark matter. We cannot see either of them, nor can we understand them. Moreover, the human eye is capable of seeing only a negligible part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. When we look at the heavens, 96% of the blueness is invisible to us. Add to this your knowledge of the structure of the spiritual realms, and it becomes mercilessly clear that a universe of possibilities exists around us that lies beyond our five senses. Today, very few scientists are willing to immerse themselves in metaphysics to explore life beyond ordinary perception and to make a connection between the visible and the invisible. Rudolf Steiner, however, one of the most prolific and gifted scientists, philosophers, and esoteric thinkers of his time, devoted a large part of his work to the task of peering behind the veil, sharing his insight into the deeper nature of life and the world beyond. With regard to anxiety and depression, Steiner speaks of hostile beings in the spiritual world that influence and feed on human emotions. Most people today categorically reject this concept, but adherents of anthroposophy, mysticism, esotericism, healers, shamans, and spiritual guides who have access to spiritual dimensions in order to alleviate the suffering of their patients know what Steiner meant. Many are familiar with the concept of energy vampires, people who drain your energy and feed on your negative emotions. Regarding the existence of similar entities that exist in other dimensions, Steiner writes, "There are beings in the spiritual realms for whom the anxiety and fear emanating from humans are easily obtained nourishment. When people have no anxiety or fear, these beings starve. Those who are not yet sufficiently convinced of this claim may come to understand that they must accept this fact, even if they do not perceive it on a mental level. But for those who are familiar with this phenomenon, it is the only reality. If fear and anxiety stream from people and erupt at some point into panic, these beings find ever more abundant nourishment and become increasingly powerful. These beings are hostile to humanity. Everything that feeds on negative feelings, on anxiety, fear, and superstition, despair, or doubt, is in fact hostile forces in the supersensible worlds that launch cruel attacks against human beings as long as they are given sustenance. Steiner writes, "The person who enters the spiritual world overcomes fear, the feeling of helplessness, despair, and anxiety. But these are precisely the feelings that belong to modern culture and materialism. They alienate people from the spiritual world and instill in them hopelessness and fear of the unknown. In this way, the aforementioned hostile forces are unconsciously summoned by those who feed them. The anthroposophist explains, negative emotions are food for hostile spirits. Statements like these are not easily accepted in everyday discourse governed by rigid skepticism and scientific materialism. Modern traditions strive to expel ancient metaphysical wisdom and its practical application from our lives. And although science is an immensely valuable achievement, spiritual perception has always been part of human experience. And yet, despite cynical skepticism, all ancient mystery schools, genuine shamanic insights, and esoteric teachings, many of which have been suppressed or distorted for thousands of years for obvious reasons, convey this truth to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, using their own language and symbolism, notes Bernhard Gwenther. According to him, this concept is embedded in the teachings of esoteric Christianity, Hermeticism, shamanism, Arab mythology, Sufism, Native American spirituality, integral yoga, and others. Our interconnectedness with extrasensory or hyperdimensional beings has long been part of our history and is directly accessible to each of us when appropriate practice and attention are devoted to the question, opening consciousness to the assimilation of information unfamiliar to the brain. Falling into the rut of spiraling negative inner dialogue, depression, crippling anxiety, or uncontrollable, irrational fear is a sign, as Steiner points out, of a disconnection from our true spiritual nature, intensified by beings that act within the spiritual realms. This is why some consider mental disorders to be spiritual illnesses, and until the rupture is healed through proper attention devoted to spiritual development, the emotions tend to deepen and bring ever more suffering. When people have no anxiety and fear, then these beings starve, Steiner concludes.